Shavua Tov and a Chodesh Tov. May the Chodesh bring blessings of good health, fulfillment, nachas to us all. I share with you this evening the story of an elderly gentleman living in Bnei Brak. He owns a nice apartment. A large banner hangs across his balcony. I'm sure many of us have seen banners like this. A banner that announces that his apartment is for sale. And the banner attracts a lot of attention. When the potential buyers come for their appointment, the owner will give him the name of Mr. Dira. Dira in Hebrew means dwelling or apartment. So when they come to the door, Mr. Dira extends a very warm welcome to them and asks them if they would like to sit for a few moments, before they get into business and have a cool drink, have a piece of fruit, a piece of cake. He has a very nice little spread set up on his coffee table in his living room. And most people actually take him up on the offer. And they schmooze. And then Mr. Dira gets up and he gives them a tour of the apartment. He gets many, many people. And he's actually gotten several offers on the apartment. None of them match his price. It was a hefty price. And Mr. Dira did not budge a shekel off of his asking price. And this goes on for more than a year. People come, they're welcomed, they eat, they tour, some offer, everybody gets rejected. Now, other people who came, there were some local people who were interested in this apartment size. It was a good building, good location. So some of the potential buyers actually knew people in the building. And one of the people in the building was Yaakov, and he became aware from some of his friends of what was going on with Mr. Dira's apartment. And he went to visit him. And he said to him, you have a nice apartment, but you're really asking above market price for your apartment. If you want to sell this apartment, you have to come down on the price. And Mr. Dira looks at him and he starts to cry. And he says, I do not want to sell this apartment. And he tells him, and Mr. Dira is an elderly gentleman. And he says, I live alone and I'm lonely. And I don't go out very often. So it's just my own apartment. And after a while, it gets to be too much. Or maybe we should say too little. And I thought that one way that I could get company would be to advertise my house for sale, my apartment for sale. And it worked. And I've gotten, as you seem to know, I've gotten a lot of people that come. And we have very nice conversations. I give nice refreshments. But Yaakov says to him, maybe what you're doing is not according to halacha. Maybe there's some geneva stas here that you're misleading people. They're giving up their time to come and to inspect an apartment which you have no intention of selling. This might not be halachically correct. So Mr. Dira asks Yaakov in the meantime to please keep the conversation confidential, but he does consult with Rabbi Silverstein about the matter. He tells him over what's been happening, and he tells Rabbi Silverstein that I have found this process to be very rehabilitating. I don't know where I would have been without the company that I was able to have from these very lovely people who came to look at my apartment. But I do need to ask the rabbi, am I doing something wrong? So before I share with you the actual response, I want you to know that I've known about this shaila for months. I've studied it many times. I've gone over this question and its answer from Rabbi Silverstein. But I always allowed myself to select a different halachic story to share with you, or to share in the shul. I've considered it sometimes, for a drasha or a sermon or some other class. But I've always picked something else. But tonight I feel that it's very, very important to share, because the tshuva gives much direction for how we should be conducting ourselves under usual conditions, and also may those usual conditions be restored very soon. It also gives us direction in our current situation, in which we are exercising great COVID precautions. So what was Rabbi Silverstein's response? He said, the general rule is that one is prohibited from being deceitful or misleading. That is halacha. We are people of truth. But there is an exception that the Gemara speaks about, that when it comes to preserving someone's health, he is allowed to employ a level of deception. In truth, the deception is not the goal. This deception in Hebrew is called ha'arama. The hey, ayin, resh, mem, hey. Sometimes pronounced harama, a little bit more Ashkenazed. And it means to mislead somebody. We actually have the word in what was this Shabbos morning's parsha. The ha'nachash haya arum mikor chayat hasadeh. The nachash was someone who had this characteristic of harama. You sometimes translate he was the most cunning, but it wasn't a cunning that was used in a good way. In this morning's parsha, the snake uses his ability to be cunning in order to mislead Chava and to cause her to sin. But here, in the case of Mr. Dira, his deception was used in a way that it wasn't like an end in itself, and the goal was a lot different than the snakes or what harama generally is. This was a harama to try to get people to be doing a mitzvah. And Rav Silverstein acknowledged that emotional pain is part of our concern of maintaining good health. In and of itself, it's a recognized illness, that emotional pain. And of course, it could lead to physical consequences against one's health if it's not properly addressed. And so that Rav Silverstein emphasized and acknowledged that we have to be careful with the totality of a person's health. Now, we have to be very careful with this heter. We know a little bit in a similar fashion. We know that we're allowed to bend the words when it comes to shalom bayis, especially if it's omitting something like Hashem did to Sarah, to Abraham about Sarah's comments. We had these couple of narrow windows of, being a little bit gray or more, but we need to make sure we never use what this exception is as any kind of general permission. But this psak has to have at least two very important and positive messages for us. The first, again, applies at all times. Although some of the options that might be normally available are not available during COVID precautions. That we have many of our neighbors are alone. Even married couples can feel alone and isolated. And this was true before COVID started. How much more so now? And how many more of us are in those ranks of feeling, isolated and wondering how our own emotions and mental health, will be. And of course, many single people feel isolated. And again, not just because of COVID. But we must think of those people who may be alone. And at this time, there are still options that we have. We can make phone calls to people. If we're going out, if we shop in stores, we might offer to pick up a couple of products for somebody else. We might have a conversation outdoors at proper social distance, maybe even a short walk if that's possible. There are kosher COVID ways of reaching out. Now we, as a community, are about to face a new challenge in our crusade to stay healthy. Up until now, we spent months trying to figure out how we can create a meaningful communal Torah or life here in the village. We do a lot of things on Zoom now. And besides what we do, many shuls, yeshivas, organizations have things online, and many of our members are taking advantage of so much that's really literally at our fingertips at the keyboard. We tried to figure out how we could have, davening. First we davened outside, then we davened inside, and with social distancing and with masks, and we reached a point where we had 3 shacharis minyanim going, and 2 Mincha Mariv minyan going at different times. And then people started seizing a window of opportunity to go generally back up north. And we lost some of our people. Some others also decided for personal or general area concerns, not to come to shul. And so our shul minyanim began to shrink. So we had to shrink the offerings of minyanim as well. And now we're about to face just the opposite of members who come for the season. And some have already made their way back to Century Village. And many more, dozens, maybe even hundreds, will be joining us in the weeks ahead. Usually at this time of the year, most people who are in the village have a great sense of excitement as they prepare to welcome friends and neighbors back into the village. But this year, truthfully, the feelings are mixed. Yes, we want to see our friends. We want to, see things more shpuradik, lebedik, and we take a walk to see more people outside. If we do go to shul, to see people we haven't seen for a long time. But at the same time, we're aware that many of our beloved members are actually coming from areas that have experienced spikes and levels of concern in terms of the coronavirus infection. So the concern is real that some, may Hashem spare us, that some may have been infected with coronavirus and are not yet aware of it, because they have no symptoms. And God forbid that should be a case. We hope that there won't be any case like that. But should that be a case, unfortunately, in a community as ours, the virus could spread, and that could be very, very harmful and generate deep pain on many different levels. And so Torah Or has established a policy. We're not the only organization that has done this here in Florida or even in Boca, but the policy that Torah Or has adopted is that anyone arriving from out of state, it doesn't matter how one arrives, whether it's by plane, by car, by foot, by boat, if you arrive from out of state, the person either has to isolate for 14 days, which means certainly not coming to shul. One who's been out of state, even for a short period of time, may not come to shul for 14 days, or the days can be reduced to 3 to 4 days if the person after that period of time will take a COVID test and will receive negative results. After receiving the negative results, would be allowed to come back to shul. Some of our membership, some of our neighbors are in a very high risk category because of their personal medical conditions. And yes, they are trying their hardest to stay protected. Many of those people have not left their condos since March, except to go to a doctor's appointment. And our concern, must be heightened now, because it's not like 1 or 2 people are coming. Like during the summer months, the spring and the summer months, we had some requests from people. I'm visiting, can I come to a minyan? It's a couple of requests that we had, and we evaluated. Sometimes it was a child or a grandchild coming to visit, and we evaluated those cases. But they were few and, as they say, really far between. But I don't have to tell you November's coming. Already some of our members have come back. And I don't have to tell you that many, many more generally in November start pouring in. There's a whole parade of people that we love to see. But at the same time, we do have some concerns. And we have to keep the bottom line of Rav Silverstein's psak, was based on the Gemara, was based on the Magen Avraham, who says that when it comes to health, that the basis that was provided in the Gemara Shabbos, in which was a case of physical health, that it applies to all areas of good health. So we have an obligation to keep ourselves healthy, and we have an obligation to keep others healthy. And if we are among those who are coming or will be coming from out of state, please remember to keep your distance from others who need to be kept separate and want to be, separated by proper social distance. Please remember the restrictions in terms of shul. And I hope that all of this was a precaution that will not even have been needed, but we'll all be happy that we help healthy and help others to stay healthy. May Hashem bless us all. I wish everybody a Shavua Tov, a Chodesh Tov, a good year. We're still at the beginning of the year. And you're welcome to unmute yourselves. I will unmute whoever I can unmute. Yes, we will start. If people have questions or comments on the Devar Halacha, you're welcome to let that be the first. And just so you can unmute yourselves if you have a question or a comment.
I don't know.
No? Okay.
Rabbi, I have a question, please. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Hi, how are you? We had an incident in our building, as an example, that you're familiar with. When people came down from New York in particular, they decided that having to wear a mask did not apply to them, that the Abishter would watch over them and would watch over us, and they're outside, and that's fine. And I'm just wondering, without causing pain to others or without compromising ourselves, is this something that we're supposed to be enforcing?
Well, first of all, for sure, in shul, the Torah or policy is that everybody who's in the shul building must wear a mask, and it must cover the mouth and the nose. That absolute the policy in the shul. Um, the general CDC guidelines are that if you cannot keep a uh, a and social distancing, or will have, and I think this is part of CDC as well, if not others are recommended, or even if you have a distance, but you're going to be engaged in a prolonged conversation or area, that you should also mask. I am aware that Yarmouth has placed signs up asking people
Correct.
to be masked. So we should all be sensitive to that, but certainly, if we are going to be, close to people, we should be wearing a mask. If we're far away from people and outdoors, by CDC guidelines, a mask is not required in that case, but certainly when we're going to be near people, they should be worn.
I mean, it
Thank
can
you.
definitely be an uncomfortable situation, and you can
Correct.
definitely be talking to people that just don't get it, you know, or like they feel like they're so right. But my feeling is like saying, I've gone to shul a few times recently. I've changed my pattern from not thinking it was safe to thinking, okay, I'm going to try this. And so, you know, like the people, for the most part, are really observing the 6 feet distance. Everybody's wearing
Good.
masks. But, you know, there can be sometimes people that don't realize it. They might be a little hard of hearing. They get a little too close to you and they want to say something to you. And, you know, I personally do tell people, even if I'm offending them, you know, please keep your distance.
Wear your mask. Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
not talk at shul, because the thing is, if these rules aren't observed, we're not going to be able to get together. You know, we're not going to be able to um, get to, like, we're starting to go back a little bit more into like being a little more comfortable being next to somebody, you know, that's 6 feet away. But it's not, we're not going to be able to do these things if people don't adhere to like these rules that seem to be helping a little bit. You know,
No,
we
I
don't
have-
know for sure, but these are things that are helping us get back to doing a few things that we can.
I'm
do
always
a
in
little more.
contact with some very prominent physicians, and it's a personal contact. And then, you know, I keep up to date online with other presentations. And the most common, and here I mean common, really, you know, the unified position, all the things that we could be doing, and I don't mean to exclude others, but the masking and the social distance always come up as being the key factors, and that when people were in settings where they did not practice that, that's where the cases of illness are being reported. People going like, for, you know, the exaggerated, unfortunately, exaggerating in large numbers, people who hold a large wedding, and then people decide to dance, and they're dancing with each other shoulder to shoulder and not wearing masks. The results are horrendous. So we have, and it doesn't have to be, that's an extreme example. Actually, like, it should not even, it's so extreme, it should never even happen, truthfully. But even in our own, you know, smaller contacts, the more we, you know, the more we stay with somebody in the same general area, the more important it is to keep the right distance and to keep the masking. It's two very important
And you know,
things.
sometimes people feel like, well, I did that last week and it was okay. And that's the crazy thing about this. You know, I personally know of a situation in Israel where there was a bar mitzvah. It was indoors. Everybody was fine afterwards. But that was at a time when Israel had a very low incidence of COVID. Now people have much more casual interactions in Israel, and it's deadly. So what happened yesterday, we can't even talk about that. That's going to be okay today. So we just have to continue following the rules. You know, that's all we can do.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Yes,
Rabbi, yes. I would like you to perhaps speak to the congregation as you are now. Thank you very much. There was an incident last week where, and I know it was a Frum family because of the way they were dressed, that a young mother was there with 6 children in the pool. And the pool clearly says no guests allowed. I tried to tell the young woman that she came when there were nobody there, but I said to her, there are people looking down and they won't come to the pool if your children are in the pool. And it says no guests allowed, meaning your children are not supposed to be in the pool area. I don't have to go through the whole story, but I think people need to be made aware, and perhaps with your coming from you, they would listen, that we all have children and grandchildren that we're hurting that we don't see. It would be best if they don't come, your children and grandchildren and my children and grandchildren, but if they do, they're not allowed in the pool. And this is going to get towards December vacation and yeshiva week. And that's how infections start. But also there is a rule here in Century Village, guests are not allowed. The young woman said to me, well, I don't know if I'm a guest. And I said, every one of the apartments people have relatives. They don't live here, they're guests. So maybe you could clarify this to people that
it is my intention to send a link to this video during the coming week so that other people hopefully will listen to it as well. As a very important general rule, we should be following all regulations, whether they're county or state regulations, whether they're Century Village regulations, association regulations. We need to honor the regulations as they are. And not only in this particular case are we concerned about, God forbid, that there should be any infection spread from a lack of following rules, but just to understand that people do hold Jews, just like they hold the state of Israel, they hold Jews to a higher level of commitment. And when we don't do what we're supposed to be doing, there is the potential for Chilul Hashem, desecrating God's name as well. So these are both very serious items.
And we should put ourselves in the position of others. Don't assume that because nobody is there that you're not preventing people from being there because you're in the pool.
Well,
so
in the
this
pool
is important.
situation,
Okay, thank you.
In the pool situation, they could actually close the pool also.
I think an issue in that regard is it is not a shul problem per se, it is a Century Village problem, and therefore security can be called. I've seen this in the past where people came with many, many, many children and were eating at the pool. Security came and certainly did their job to have them politely removed.
I do think it's an important distinction to make. Obviously as a shul, we have more jurisdiction and rights to define who can come into our building and not. And, other things do have to be dealt with on a different level. Okay.